Well, in this week, we'll look into China's economy, a topic that has made international headlines after the National Bureau of Statistics released its quarterly data on July 17th. China's GDP grew by 5.5% year-on-year in the first half of 2023. So despite the complex international environment and domestic challenges, that is in line with the full-year target of around 5% for 2023. From April to June, China's GDP growth stood at 6.3% year-on-year, the highest since 2022, as you can see from this chart. Now, let's break it down. In the first half of the year, total retail sales of consumer goods maintained a relatively fast growth of 8.2% year-on-year in January to June. Consumption contributed 77.2% to the economic growth, and China's total goods imports and exports expanded 2.1% year-on-year to 20.1 trillion yuan. That's about $2.81 trillion US dollars. Exports grew 3.7% year-on-year, while imports edged down 0.1% from a year earlier. Note that China has overtaken Japan, becoming #1 car exporter in the first quarter, with 1.07 million of car sales. Let's listen to what the spokesperson of the National Bureau of Statistics sum up these data.
Globally, economic recovery has been sluggish since the beginning of the year, with persistent inflationary pressures. Major economies have implemented monetary tightening measures to tackle inflation, which has led to noticeable spillover effects. However, in the face of these complex external challenges, China's economy has managed to outperform major developed economies, showcasing its robust resilience in economic development.
So how does China's GDP growth compare with other major economies? Still relatively high, said the spokesperson of the National Bureau of Statistics, with the United States at 1.8%, the Eurozone at 1%, Japan at 1.9%, and Brazil at 4% in the first quarter of 2023. What's more, China's growth rate in the first half of 2023 is projected to be among the highest. In January 2023, the World Bank forecast for China was 4.3%, but it raised to 5.6% in its forecast in June. However, it has revised down projections for most economies as a bumpy road still lies ahead. Now, in the latest update to its World Economic Outlook on July 25th, the IMF set its forecast for growth in China unchanged at 5.2% in 2023. Nevertheless, concerns over China's economy looms large as data in the first half of 2023 are partly driven by a low base from the same period last year. So, is China in trouble? Well, that's what The Economist wants its readers to believe. For the private sector, for example, of course, the Chinese government has already acknowledged the situation. On July 19th, China's State Council announced a raft of 31 measures to spur private sector growth, including removing barriers to market access and ensuring fair competition. And there's also youth unemployment. In June, the surveyed unemployment rate for young people aged 16 to 24 reached 21.3%, the highest since the data was first collected in the year 2018. And to make it easier to find jobs, employers across the country will be encouraged to provide 1 million internships. A strong focus on vocational training will allow at least 15 million people to hone their job skills this year. What else needs to be done? Well, on July 24th, the Political Bureau of the Communist Party of China's Central Committee held a meeting on economic work and set the tone for the second half of the year. The meeting pointed at an insufficient domestic demand, a sluggish private sector growth, some risks and hidden dangers in key areas, as well as a grim and complex external environment. The government will stick to a proactive fiscal policy and a prudent monetary policy. Strong support will be given to scientific and technological innovation, the real economy, and the development of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. However, what does China's economy look like through the lens of Western media? Is China struggling, or other media struggling to push their narrative? Let's now take a closer look. As expected, the media has been keen on jumping on the bandwagon, with Bloomberg sort of berating China for its disappointing growth. And for CNBC, China's economy seems to be grinding to a halt with signs of stalled recovery. The Economist puts on its white coat and takes the pulse of China's economy. I'm not in the least surprised. After all, we've all been hearing about the coming collapse of China for decades, to quote the title of a book published in 2001. Well, the Western media revels in doom-mongering, and every bit of data can be used to substantiate claims of a coming collapse. Well, I've got news for you. Collapse? It isn't. China's economy is resilient, and before passing judgment on China based on a selective set of data, I would like to advise looking at the bigger picture here. If China's data were reportedly disappointing, it's because that the world is still looking to China for growth. And that's fantastic news. Despite all the talk of decoupling and de-risking, most economies are still heavily betting on China. Well, bad news for China seems bad news for the world economy. So let's get real there for a minute. We've also seen reports on China's deflationary trends. And for those old enough to remember, that's what happened during Japan's lost decade in the 1990s. Will China suffer Japan's fate? Well, most Western media are sounding the alarm bell, blaming sluggish demand. China is on the brink of deflation. Deflation is looming. The data says that in the first half of the year, China's consumer price index rose 0.7% year on year, and the producer price index dropped 3.1% during the first 6 months. In June, the CPI continued to edge lower, staying flat on a yearly basis, while the PPI fell further to a record low since 2016. But is it a structural problem? Not really, according to Liu Guoqiang, deputy governor of the People's Bank of China. He said that the challenges currently faced by the Chinese economy are a normal phenomenon in the era following the global COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the country's softening price growth in recent months, Liu predicted that China's consumer price index, or CPI, the main gauge of inflation, will see a U-shaped trajectory this year. And even CNBC is at odds with the deflation narrative, calling it disinflation. However, Macquarie economists Larry Hu and Yu Xiaozhang characterized the condition in China as disinflation, a temporary slowdown of rising prices, rather than deflation, which refers to a more serious problem where there's a persistent decrease in prices over time. So it's more a readjustment than a structural problem. No lost decade on the horizon, obviously. Plus, China has plenty of leeway to use highly targeted monetary tools. It did so in the past, and it will continue now, as it has many fiscal and monetary policy options available. So now let's dig into what's obsessing many commentators. China's youth unemployment. The surveyed unemployment rate for young people aged 16 to 24 hit a record 21.3% in June. Al Jazeera points at China's seemingly poor economic performance and its failure to provide enough jobs. While Business Insider quotes Northwestern University economist Nancy Chan, saying that China's economy is in crisis and the nation's young unemployment problem could be at the root of its current troubles. Well, if the economy is going to grow or at least avoid contraction in the long run, the government must create the conditions for job creation in high productivity sectors and for greater investment in higher education. Well, this is more of a global problem than just a China problem. As China moves up the value chain and with the ongoing technological innovation and the emergence of new industries, especially in the service sector, the China labor market is consistently evolving, creating new opportunities for job seekers and businesses. Flexibility and adaptability are crucial to fixing youth unemployment. No one said it would be all roses and that China has a magic wand to solve all the problems, especially given the sheer size of China's job markets. And commentators have been keen on reading the tea leaves on China's economy, but its futile exercise in taxiography has its limits. Yes, China is facing numerous challenges, and we cannot expect miracles overnight. But perhaps we should read the data more holistically, analyzing important aspects of the economy, such as the quality of the growth, optimization of economic structure, not just the quantitative end result figures.